Jesse James, famous for his custom-made motorcycles, made headlines multiple times in the past decade for being associated with Nazis. The world went crazy when US Weekly released a photo of Jesse in a car, where a man was giving a Sieg Heil salute. As if that wasn't enough, another picture of a children's book character dressed as Hitler started making rounds on Facebook. How is this connected to Jesse James, you ask? Well, that picture was posted by one of James's employees. The connections between this CEO and Nazism are seemingly endless. There's even a picture of the dude from back in 2004 where he's saluting while wearing a Nazi hat. It seems like Jesse likes to surround himself with people like him, because a picture of his former mistress Michelle McGree was released, and you guessed it, she's proudly donning Nazi paraphernalia too. McGree is seen striking a pose with a Nazi hat and swastika armband. A friend close to Jesse James jumped to the entrepreneur's defense, saying that all those pictures don't make Jesse a Nazi or even a racist. He does all that because he's into history, and the swastika is just to scare people because that's what biker culture is. Now, if this were the 60s, this whole bit about history might be believable. But the truth is that biker clubs have existed since World War II, and it was pretty common for them to wear iron crosses and swastikas to scare people off. The Germans used various symbols to scare people off, and make no mistake, biker clubs were a part of this too. Even though James is just using swastikas to scare people, there are many who have taken direct inspiration from these biker clubs that existed during the Second World War. The Sadistic Souls are one of them, it seems. The small white supremacist outlaw biker gang operates mostly out of the Midwest and are a part of the famous neo-Nazi group known as Aryan Nations. Sadistic Souls members are seen with Aryan Nation symbology, along with biker jackets rendered with a Totenkopf picture. Even though the Sadistic Souls and other biker clubs still exist today, one thing's for sure: Nazi symbolism is way less common in the biker community, especially compared to the past. Tom Barker, a professor at Eastern Kentucky University, explored this topic and claims that all that symbolism is a thing of the past, and seeing stuff like that today is pretty unusual. When you look back into history though, biker clubs weren't afraid of anything, and proudly wore whatever Nazi symbols they could find. It was common to see highways in America flooded with these biker dudes wearing every kind of Nazi emblem, ranging from swastikas to iron crosses, SS-style lightning bolts, steel helmets, and even peaked caps. All that stuff simply isn't in fashion anymore, at least according to Professor Barker. Why do they use these insignia? Even though Nazi symbolism isn't as common anymore, and it definitely isn't in fashion, considering the huge uproar against anti-Semitism in America in recent years, it might be confusing as to why these bikers use Nazi insignia. Well, the answer is way simpler than you think, and honestly pretty obvious. It's all a marketing ploy. Using a Nazi symbol, no matter how small, is bound to make its way into news headlines, and biker clubs have figured out it's the best way to get publicity. And while a lot of motorcycle clubs have chapters all over the world, including Germany, where any Nazi symbol is illegal, a lot of what they preach is toned down. Most biker clubs don't have the same hateful motives anymore. They just want to make money and become a profitable business. Take the Hells Angels Motorcycle Corporation as an example. The company has raked in thousands from their merch and trademarking their logo alone. It's definitely fair to say that the biker community changed. Do Nazi symbols have other meanings? By now, we know a lot of bikers use Nazi symbols, and that it's pretty normalized in biker clubs across America. But a lot of bikers argue that any Nazi-related iconography doesn't mean that they support the Nazi movement. In fact, it has more to do with wanting to get people riled up. These clubs want to come off as badass, and to them, showing a controversial symbol that pisses people off is the real reason. Here's a little history lesson for you. Biker clubs started appearing in the USA after the Second World War in the late 1940s. After the war was over, veterans brought home things like iron crosses as a symbol of their victory, along with other various trophies. Bikers known as one-percenters ended up adopting these symbols as a form of patriotic rebellion. These 1%ers were in contrast to the 99% of bikers who obeyed the law. Using Nazi symbols showed the world that they loved their country but didn't care about their countrymen who were clearly uncomfortable with their use of these signs. All of this stuff is just to shock people, at least according to Sonny Barger of Hell's Angels. All the Nazi insignia, the German helmets, the iron crosses, it's just a way to let the world know that these biker clubs are individualists. Julian Scher, one of the authors of Angels of Death, inside the biker club's global crime empire, went as far as to say that if a Hell's Angels guy is wearing Nazi paraphernalia, it's basically their equivalent of sticking up a finger to some middle-class family they see in a Volvo. In Hell's Angels, Thompson argues that if biker paraphernalia is supposed to provoke and mock society, they should drop the whole antisocial swastika-bearing act and use alternative symbols such as the hammer and sickle. So, what does it all mean? At the end of the day, there's no denying that any sort of Nazi symbols within biker clubs are unacceptable. It doesn't matter if Jesse James wore it just because he's a history buff, which, by the way, has totally been debunked, since many members of biker clubs themselves admitted they wear these symbols just to look badass. But all these Nazi symbol sightings were years ago, at least for Jesse James. Biker clubs are way less common today, and many of them avoid using Nazi symbols, at least in the US. Nazi iconography was very common a few years ago, but times have changed, and now you'll only see a biker gang sporting them occasionally.